Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Darwin Porter is here. Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning to you, Anita. Sounds like a great show.
How is Staten Island? Are you? Is it any warmer there now?
Yes, not enough, but spring is coming. Things are blossoming, and the trees are out, and life is returning here after a bad winter. I have a lot to tell you.
Okay.
And first, I'll lead in with my publisher and your friend Danforth Prince recently met with American media in Lower Manhattan. It seems like they own, the National Enquirer, the National Examiner, and Globe, and several publications. And so it was very interesting. Apparently, they're planning, and it's almost settled that they're planning to hook up with Hudson News, who is shelling out $100 million to them. And even though they've been in decline, right now I think the National Enquirer has about 500,000 circulation, which is a lot, but not the 3 million it had. And a lot of that has to do with the changing taste. And there have been some surveys done and about Generation Z and the millennials as opposed to baby boomers and our parents. And apparently our parents and baby boomers were the most culturally sophisticated people that have ever existed on the planet. But that's not necessarily true of the younger generation. Now, the National Enquirer has had a lot of publicity lately because of its CEO, David Pecker. That's his real name, Pecker.
I was going to I was going to ask you that because it's ridiculous.
But, well, could you imagine in the Army someone would call out to him, "Okay, Pecker." And and the Mueller investigation exposed he had been buying up stories from women with allegations about our president and then not publishing them, but just sort of buying them up. And so it got a lot of publicity. Now, I was interested in why Hudson News. Now, Hudson News, if you've ever been into an airport, you'll probably see Hudson News there. They sell little newspapers, magazines, peanuts, candy bars, and but they're all over America. And I was wondering why they were interested in spending so much money on what might be failing publications. And so they have a plan. Their fame really came back, like in the 50s, Confidential. It was movie star exposés. But now the let's just call them millennials, they don't seem particularly interested in that type of story, like what were Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton up to. And so I was wondering, what kind of news emphasis do these tabloid journals have or foresee for the future if they're not celebrity obsessed? And if you'll indulge me, I've come up with some things I've found that are being investigated for publication. I'll just read you some of them. I find some of them a hoot. And some are tragic. How a mom hopes to save herself from death row, a beauty queen who dies after plastic surgery, or dark secrets of sports figures such as Tiger Woods, lesbian weddings, or how Obama's aunt is struggling to keep immigration authorities from deporting her, or an advice column from Ivana Trump, who calls herself First Lady.
Right. First Lady. Great, right.
How a paroled convict executed 4 cops. How a woman spent a night with space aliens who raped her. And don't let killer bacteria strike you. Or big box office stinkers. And here's one I love because it's fashion tragedies. Now, here are two a little bit outrageous. The most recent sighting of Elvis Presley living in seclusion as a gaucho on a ranch outside Buenos Aires. And this one, Hillary Clinton's deathbed confession that she did indeed run a bordello in Washington, catering to pedophiles desiring 13-year-olds.
Are you kidding? You must be kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
Okay, so wait, before you go any further, how did they, I've always wondered, how could they get away with things like this when we see this crazy stuff?
Well, they didn't always. Sometimes they've been destroyed. For example, I'm doing a book on Burt Reynolds, the former most famous resident of your wonderful and my former state of Florida. And there's just a little story that I'm including. He was a great friend of Carol Burnett, and Carol Burnett was once exposed by Confidential for being drunk in a Washington restaurant hanging out with the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Now, she was one of the few people who ever sued for libel, and she won. And, of course, it cost her a fortune because it was appealed many times. She was very sensitive about the alcoholism because both of Carol's parents were alcoholics. And so she did sue and carry it through, and she did get a final settlement, which she donated to charity. And Confidential eventually was sued. But somehow the National Enquirer, like that story on Hillary, which is all over the web, well, Hillary doesn't sue. I mean, but they have been sued, and there have been settlements. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I'll tell you just one quick thing about Burt Reynolds and the National Enquirer. He was exposed many, many times in the National Enquirer, but he only went to the defense when they attacked his friend Carol Burnett. And he lived in Jupiter, and you've been there several times.
Yeah, and, right, very much. I used to live up there, actually, and my husband had been on the board of the Burt Reynolds Theater.
Yes,
yeah.
I heard that. So Burt had a black helicopter, and he also had a stable of horses. So after they exposed Carol, he went to the stable and got a great big tub of horse pucky.
No kidding.
and it was right at Christmas, and the National Enquirer, and you may remember this, they used to boast they had the tallest Christmas tree in the world, and they did, and it was decorated.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, people came from all over Florida. They drove up from Key West, down from Tallahassee to see it. So he put the tub of horse pucky and then in his helicopter, he flew over the National Enquirer and dumped all that on the Christmas tree. And he later said, if the National Enquirer is giving crap to Carol and me, I'll give crap back to them.
Wow, that's an unheard story. Will that be in your book?
Yes, I'm putting it in because I'm writing about his great friendship with Carol Burnett. But now, to get on with the change in taste between baby boomers and our parents in Generation Z and, millennials, whatever you want to call them, a survey, say, in the 40s, baby boomers were just being born in 1946, but mostly our parents. There were movie surveys of what people were interested in. I just want to read off the incredible list of 1940 celebrities who were being written about, and there existed at the time an unbelievable 50 magazines. You remember some of them, Modern Screen, Photoplay. I'm sure you've seen
those.
And just reading quickly the list of people they had to write up: Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, John Wayne, Gary Cooper, Marlena Dietrich, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, James Stewart, Errol Flynn, Elizabeth Taylor, and the pinup girls of World War II, Rita Hayworth, Betty Grable, and Lana Turner. Woo! What a list of incredible people. And then in the 50s alone came Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and Grace Kelly. Now, the survey of, as I said, we'll call them millennials. Do you know when they did these surveys of young people, they couldn't even name a dozen movie stars. I found that extraordinary. The only one that, in other words, to be on that survey, you had to be a little bit more than 2% of people who knew you, or you wouldn't be famous. The only one who appeared on that survey that most people recall is Tom Cruise, and he's getting on up there, but he's only on that list because of this Mission Impossible franchise. Now, the people like Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Brad Pitt, Johnny Depp, Jane Fonda were not included because essentially they're in the twilight of their careers. I don't mean the twilight of their deaths. You know, obviously you don't see a lot of Brad Pitt movies anymore. And an interesting thing was the African-American people surveyed knew more about their performers than the white people knew about their performers. And I found that very interesting. So the fall-off in celebrity expose or something has fallen tremendously. For example, let's go back to the baby boomers. They had so many singers that were, I mean, just legendary. Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, Perry Como, Eddie Fisher, Bing Crosby, Doris Day, and we'll never forget the legendary Judy Garland. Oh, brother, was she a magazine tabloid fixture for most of her life. And now we come into more cultural sophistication. Let's just call them the BBs. They eat today. When asked about young people about Broadway stars, they could not name one Broadway star.
Wait, I have to interrupt you to tell you something. That I brought the Kirk Douglas, your wonderful last book, to my sales meeting, and I was going to tell them about the book, and they all went crazy. I want to read it. I want to read it. I said, "Do you remember Kirk Douglas? Are you kidding?" Now these people are in their 50s. They loved Kirk Douglas, and they knew all about things, and I have now them waiting I'm giving them each one. I have two books, one, and I said I had to have it back, but you can read it. They said, "Oh my gosh, look at all this stuff." So that's kind of interesting because I would think they wouldn't have thought about Kirk Douglas, but they would have thought about some of these other people you named. So, I think I'm just thinking about this. People who became famous for other kinds of things, like Kirk Douglas is more famous now, I think, because of his son, Michael Douglas. Yes. And, of course, they knew about his beautiful wife, and then they knew about Kirk Douglas, who he was a womanizer, even without reading the book. Isn't that strange?
Yes, it is. And, of course, now I'm finding people who do not know who Michael Douglas is.
Now, that's funny.
It really, the fall-off in interest in celebrities. But, for example, on these Broadway stars, when I hit New York, the leading Catherine Cornell, Alfred Lund, Lynn Fontaine, Ethel Merman, Carol Channing, Mary Martin, Tallulah Bankhead. I mean, these were sort of like household words. But now, for example, I always read the latest list of the New York Times bestseller list. And, of course, I remember the other day I was going through my files and I found a copy of the New York Times bestseller list from 1952. the year that Eisenhower ran for president. And I knew every author on that list. And on the New York Times bestseller list, I knew only one author, and her name was Michelle Obama. And the other people were like appearing for the first time. Mm-hmm. And you may, they had this one book in them, and you may never hear from them again. But I just want, and I'm sure you'll recognize every name on this list in the 50. Norman Mailer, who wrote The Naked and the Dead, and was once the subject of a column in the Boomer Times.
Yes.
And Arthur Miller, the playwright, married to Marilyn Monroe, and everybody in the world back then had heard of Tennessee Williams, and Truman Capote, Gore Vidal, William Faulkner, F. Scott Fitzgerald, John Steinbeck, and you've heard of Ernest Hemingway.
And this was really in the New York Times book at that time? The book?
Yes.
Is that
and
right?
Then, of course, if I wanted to read a detective story, I read Agatha Christie. I loved her work. And today, you just don't know. I don't know. My former agent launched the career of John Grisham. He's very well known, and James Patterson is sort of well known. He just recently did a book with Bill Clinton.
Yes.
And but like these famous writers, they don't seem to exist anymore.
So tell me, let's just stop for a minute. Tell me, you started out was discussing the way that the younger people today think about. We started with those magazines with all the outrageous things they say, yes, and all this. What do you think is the reason?
Well, I don't know. I really have thought about that a lot. In many ways, baby boomers are keeping alive the culture of the 20th century, which was the most vital in the history of all time. And they seem to have, I hate to say this, but almost better taste. I mean, like some of those writers, they were doing incredible plays on Broadway, like A Streetcar Named Desire, and Arthur Miller did 2 or 3 really marvelous plays. But today, I'm not particularly tempted to go to so many of the plays being produced, because I liked a more literary kind of. I wanted to go to a play that had a more literary bent to it, but that's just my taste. But the recognition. Someone said we were interested in vices, not devices. Meaning today, you often see people just going around punching into their cell phone, and the write-off, the interest in famous writers and stuff has dwindled tremendously, but generations change, but yet the rich culture of the 20th century and the events of the 20th century. I mean, God knows we don't want to see some of those events ever equaled again. Let me give you an example. There were 2 poets back then that really had national recognition. There is no poet today that they were Carl Sandburg and Robert Frost. On these polls, baby boomers even have heard of dancers Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, and they even know baby boomers even knew of 2 pilots, Amelia Earhart, who disappeared in 1937, and Howard Hughes, the aviator producer. I once wrote a book on him called Hell's Angel. And it's just fantastic. And now we get into world leaders.
Wait, before you do that, I want to stay. Wait, before you do that, I want to stay with these celebrities. Do you know that your article on Mae West coming up in our May issue is on our cover? I have that picture. It was such a fantastic picture. I have her on the picture and on the cover. And people will know Mae West.
Well, I mean, maybe young people won't, but Mae West.
They may. No, they may know her because you still hear some of the funny things that she's famous for, the things she said.
Like, come up and see me sometime.
Yeah, right.
Or, is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just glad to see me?
Anyway, I just had to tell
Mae
you
West.
this. That,
and
yeah.
In World War II, the Life Vest was called a Mae West.
Oh, really? Yes, I think I remember that.
And she also saved Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy. In fact, in the famous movie Sunset Boulevard, Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond arrives at the Paramount Studios, and they won't let her in. She's a has-been now. And she says, without me, there would be no Paramount Pictures. Well, that was true for Mae West. She saved the studio, and it was just a really a different time. And of course, I got to meet Mae West on 2 occasions, and both were Tennessee Williams was a friend of mine, and we were. I was seeing him in Hollywood, and he said, I'm going to see and meet Mae West tomorrow. And I said, oh, God, I hate to intrude, but could I go along? And he said, oh, I'm sure she would be delighted to. Well, she came out dressed like Diamond Lil in an 1890s gown. I never saw her in a short dress, even if it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And she was very gracious and courteous to me, and very amusing, heavily made up, and covered in diamonds. And then she used, I complimented on her beautiful jewelry. And I think, apparently I said goodness or something. And she said, darling, goodness had nothing to do with it. And then she said, Tennessee, let's face it, there are only 3 great playwrights left in America. Myself, and you, and Eugene O'Neill.
Isn't that something?
She put herself in the category of, well, she did write plays. One was called Sex, which ended up getting her arrested and thrown
no
in
kidding.
jail.
Really?
Yes, she had the judge said, I'll give you a $500 fine or you can go to jail. And she said, I will choose the jail. Of course, she knew that would give her nationwide publicity. She said, the only thing is, I understand that the female inmates have to wear this horrible underwear, and I have to be granted permission to wear only red silk panties.
Oh, my goodness. And what happened?
She got the red silk panties.
How long did she have to go to jail for?
For sex.
I know, but for how long?
Considered see, in those days, the censorship was terrible, and I've read the play. It's really, by today's standards, it would just be Alice in Wonderland. but you see, though, going to jail, and the play wasn't doing too well. And once she landed, she was smart. Once she landed in jail, they started lining up the block around Broadway. You know,
gosh, what a great
she
story,
also did
Darwin.
a play about drag called Drag, as she invented the word drag queen.
She did?
Of course, Mae West herself was accused of being a drag
queen. Oh, but
queen.
She did invent that word?
Yes.
No kidding.
And she may have invented, people disagree with me on, she may have invented the word gay. So, and she was a favorite of gay people and still is today. I loved her. I really did.
Yeah, so you see, that's why I knew people are going to love this cover with her on it. But let's get back to what you were saying. I didn't mean to get you off track.
No, well, okay.
You know, we do have an extra 15 minutes today, which is great.
Yes. Well, one thing I want to talk to you about is how baby boomers and our parents knew so much more about world leaders. On the recent survey, the most famous man on earth, known in every country of the world, is Donald Trump. But now here's what, for example, I recently talked to these people from Finland, and they said, we don't know anything about our own news or what's going on in our own country because every night all the broadcasts in Helsinki are about Donald Trump. And so he is pretty famous. I mean, not pretty famous, the most famous man in the world. I mean, even people who don't know who Queen Elizabeth is apparently know Donald Trump. Now, when young people are asked other world leaders, they draw a blank. And, for example, our neighbor is Canada. In fact, the Boomer Times once published an article on Mr. Trudeau, and the
Yes.
Boomer Times also published an article on Macron in France. And,
yes, thanks to you. Thanks to you.
These people are not known. Theresa May, Margaret Thatcher was once made the list, but she's faded. But Theresa May, these people are not known. But our parents and ourselves, I just want to read some of the world leaders. Now, you could say these people became famous because of World War II, but they would also be famous without the war because they were fantastic leaders. I'll just read. Well, of course, at the top of the list would be FDR and Sir Winston Churchill. But maybe they even knew back then who Haile Selassie was of Ethiopia, de Gaulle of France. And have you ever heard of a man named Adolf Hitler and Hirohito of Japan and Mussolini of Italy? And in Iberia, there was Franco of Spain and dictator Salazar of Portugal. And let's not leave out Israel. Golda Meir and Ben Gurion became two of the most famous people in the world. But it's interesting that the younger generation seems to have, well, I'm not putting everybody in that category. Some people are very bright. I met a young girl who amazed me at her knowledge. But apparently, world leaders today don't seem to be of great interest to millennials. But see, like every name on that list is, of course, speaking of generals, we had Douglas MacArthur and Dwight Eisenhower. And when it comes to first ladies, there are two, and I bet you'll know immediately who are the two most famous first ladies of all time.
Jackie.
What's that?
Jackie, of course.
If you don't mind, I'm going...
Oh, okay. You're having a problem hearing.
Yeah, but
okay.
Would you like me to switch to another line?
No, I hear you fine. It's up to you.
You hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to adjust your microphone. Is your microphone close to your mouth?
Yeah, mine is.
Okay, good. Okay, it's on my line. I've had this problem before. I'm going to, from now on, call you on a cell phone.
That's okay. Let's talk. So who are the two famous? One is Jackie,
Eleanor Roosevelt
right?
was the most famous woman in the world.
Yeah.
And she is ranked now as one of the most famous women in all of history. Ranking, there's one woman more famous than Eleanor Roosevelt. The Virgin Mary.
You're so bad.
And, of course, after Eleanor, Jacqueline Kennedy.
Of course.
Which was the subject of the best-selling book I ever wrote.
Yes, yes.
She captured,
yes.
throughout everything she did was...
yes.
Was
she was really extraordinary, wasn't she, in many ways?
Yes, but then many of the first ladies of the 20th century are, for example, if you said, Darwin, do 30 minutes on Mrs. Jimmy Carter, I could do that because I've been really interested in all these. I know all this stuff about Mamie Eisenhower and Betty Ford and I even wrote a book on Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
But I find that that the interest in these political figures, except for Donald Trump, he really, frankly, I think we had a column on the Boomer Times about our present First Lady, but I found people don't seem to know much about her either, even though she's one of the least publicized First Ladies we've ever had, because she, I think, is a much more private person. Well, Jacqueline Kennedy was private, but the world didn't want her to be private. But isn't that amazing that
yes.
baby boomers and people, they knew even the president of Ethiopia?
Yep. Well, I was thinking as you were talking that, of course, Meghan and Harry are famous everywhere.
Well, now, what's interesting about that is Meghan and Harry now are getting the kind of press that used to be reserved for Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton.
Right.
And they are really in the news and all their troubles. And, of course, that's quite it's a fascinating story. And because of sort of the racial background of Harry's wife, that has also brought her a lot of attention from the African-American press and other countries that normally wouldn't be writing about. And then also her alleged feud with the
right.
Prince William and his wife. I don't know whether it's a genuine feud or just a media event. But right now they are being wide. Well, obviously you know that because you mention it. But they seem to be getting more headlines right now than movie stars or celebrities.
You know what's changed too, though, that even though I love to read magazines, and I do when I turn on my iPhone and I go to some things, all of a sudden all these stories pop up. And that's what I think has happened with the younger population. That's how they're getting their news. And it's whatever anybody wants to tell them, that's what they get on their iPhone. Well, CNN and various places, Vanity Fair. So it is, see, before we waited for the movies. Remember, we went once a week, we saw what was happening. And then, of course, we had the radio. But now the amazing part is people can get information everywhere.
Well, that is true. I mean, there's more information out there, but like that woman in Finland said, the world news is being diminished by the concentration these days on Washington.
Yes.
For example, there are major events occurring in the world. The ice is melting on the Himalayan mountains.
Yes.
And 1/4 of the world water will be of people who depend on that will be affected. Mozambique is buried underwater with millions homeless, starving.
Yes.
People in Yemen may become the greatest disaster of all time. There's just so much going on in the world, and I swear, when I go to bed at night, I always have on the news, and sometimes I fall asleep. And when I wake up, it's really what's happening are going on in Washington. So American politics are dominating the world stage. I think the great thing about what's happening, it is a fabulous time for journalists. You know, there were certain times during the administration of Daddy Bush, George H.W. Bush, the news from Washington was sort of dull there a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we had a war or something.
Well, I think Clinton made it more exciting because of, his escapades. But Clinton started, I think, a lot of things where you would hear stuff from words that they never would have said before.
Are you talking about
Bill?
The F word?
Yeah, well, Bill. No, the Bill Clinton affair. So all of a sudden now we're listening to world news and we're hearing about, all sorts of things that he did in the White House.
Well, for example, I remember once when I worked on the Miami Herald, 3 or 4 of us were sent to interview Elizabeth Taylor on Miami Beach. She was staying at the Fontainebleau Hotel. And I wrote in my article that she undressed in front of us. Now, that's not as provocative as it seems, because all movie stars undress from I mean, they spend all their time undressing and dressing and getting ready. Do you know, my editor said, we can't print that.
Really?
Yes, I just threw it in. Well, first, to see Elizabeth Taylor undress was a thrill. I mean, how many kids my age got to see that? But now, for the first time in a Senate hearing, I have now heard Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, use the F word in a public hearing and broadcast all over the nation. And the S word for feces is now commonly broadcast. And I'm now seeing that in national media, including the New York Times. Now, I trained as a newspaper man. Well, you know, I could never, I mean, I would get fired if I used that. I'm not prude about language, because in my books I use what people said. I mean, if Elizabeth Taylor had a potty mouth, and she did, I loved her, but, you know, she had a potty mouth, and I had a quote from her, I would now, in my book, I print the quote she said. I did not revise it to make it more palatable, because I think I can do that in a book, and certainly in this day and age. But I never knew that national media would start use. You must have noticed this too.
Yes, I do. And, you know, I'm so glad you were on this morning to talk about this, because I've been thinking a lot about it myself. And before our eyes, because you and I are the same age, before our very eyes, we've seen.
No, you're younger than me.
Oh, yeah, right.
By 4 months.
Okay, I'll take it.
I was born 4 months before you.
It's okay, but see, that's what I've been thinking about, that when I was growing up, what we thought about, and now, if we still are as alive as you and I are, that we watch everything, we have seen an amazing, well, it's a reverberation of everything that we believed. It's changed, and we can go along with the change, but the biggest point that you made that I think is important, and I have 1 minute, is that we are there watching what's going on, and the older people, hopefully they're keeping up with it too. So, listen, when Hamilton becomes the most famous play, that's unusual.
That is, but you're absolutely right. But that's not typical of what's going on. That was every now and then. They call it on Broadway a freak show. They don't mean that people are freaks.
I know.
But it's just something that just comes out of the blue and takes over, and you don't know why, and you can't duplicate it.
I love you, Darwin. I gotta go, and you're so fabulous. I have to tell you, there's no one I would get up for but you at 5 o'clock, and the same thing for me. You're wonderful. I love you. Thank you for doing everything you do, and you're going to love the cover of our new May issue coming up.
I can't wait. I love all your covers. They're
thank
the best
you.
magazine in Florida and elsewhere.
Thank you, Darwin. My love. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.